We're continuing our study in the book of Exodus. The reason why we're doing this is because Exodus is the backstory of the gospel. It gives us an understanding of what the Bible's ultimately about and what God is looking to do through Jesus. And we've been talking about the Ten Commandments. We've been talking about how the Ten Commandments aren't just a list of rules. Like, we got to do these things in order to get God to like us. The Ten Commandments are ultimately an invitation to a relationship. And so we've been looking at how Jesus taught each one of these Ten Commandments because he teaches us how to actually live them out. Now, I'm in a stage of life right now where we do a lot of trips as a family because our kids are in that sweet spot where they're finally, old enough to kind of do a lot of things, but they're not too old that we're not cool anymore. So we're still trying to do all the family stuff every time we get a chance. And so during fall break, we went to Dollywood for the very first time and rode some roller coasters. Let me tell you, I hadn't ridden a roller coaster in a long time. My kids had never really ridden any roller coasters. They'd ridden some that you kind of get at those state, fairs where you're kind of worried because that thing was on a truck 3 days ago. And you've seen the people setting it up, so you're like, man, I don't know. We may make it, we may not. But we went to Dollywood, and we went on the very first ride that we came to, which is something called Thunderhead. Now, that's an awesome name for an awesome roller coaster. Thunderhead is an incredible experience because it's a new roller coaster that they made look old. It's made out of wood. They made it loud on purpose. A lot of the roller coasters at Dollywood are really quiet. This one, they're we're going to make it really loud, and it strikes fear in your heart when you hear that thing go by. And so we're let's go on it. So I have 4 kids. The baby didn't go on it because that's illegal, but we brought the other ones. We brought our 12-year-old, our 10-year-old, and our 7-year-old, and none of them had ever been on a roller coaster, really. And again, me and Tabitha, it's been a long time. So we got on this thing, and we were not ready. We just weren't ready for what happened next. We were okay, this is going to be fun. It's going to be this, cool starter ride. No, listen. I think we had white hair afterwards, okay? In fact, I'm not just going to tell you, I'm going to show you. Check this out. Here, we actually have footage of what it feels like to be on Thunderhead. And if you need Dramamine, I'm sorry. All right, so here you are, going up to the top. I can't tell you who took this because you're not supposed to have a phone, okay? But here we go. Yeah, I feel like I'm going to fall over. It's this close, okay? So you kind of come up and kind of go, over, and then here's the second drop. You ready? Here we go. All the way up, all the way up, all the way up. Oh yeah. And let me just tell you, you feel like throwing up right about here, okay? I'm going to spare you the rest of it because we actually have the whole ride on tape. But, is it still going? Okay. Everybody's I'm just totally, freaked out, okay? But we got off that thing, and all of us were yes, we survived! Everybody was high-fiving each other. Even Georgia, who had never had anything like that in her life, was her eyes were this big. We were are you okay? She was that was the greatest experience of my life. She never wrote another one. But we were all yes, that was awesome. We can't wait to do that again. And we did. And we went on a bunch of different roller coasters, and we did that the first day, and then the next day we actually got fast passes, so we just cut in line in front of all these people. We felt bad, but not bad enough to not do it. Have you ever been there? You're man, I'm sorry you're in line, but we get to go again, right? So you did that whole thing, and we rode that ride 3 more times. In fact, 2 of them were back to back, which the human body is not made to do. I physically was man, I feel rough. But I'm telling you, there was something that was really thought-provoking for me as a pastor at the end. That last night when we were finishing up all our rides, we rode Thunderhead one more time, and we were both meh, at the end. Yeah. The same ride that we were wow, our life flashed before our eyes. We were yeah, that was cool, high five, and we went home. And I believe there's something to the saying that many of us have heard before, which is that familiarity breeds contempt. When you get used to something, when you're around it a lot, all of a sudden it no longer is cool or awe-inspiring anymore. The same reason why people who live by the beach never go. You know those people? Shame on them. It's the same reason why people who live by great scenic mountainsides often are like, yeah, it's just the mountains. Why? Because when we have a lot of experience with something, we can miss the amazing nature of what it truly is. And that, friends, is the heart of the third commandment. So let's look at the text. Exodus 20, verse 7 says this: do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Now, many of you have heard this before. In fact, you probably know it old school, King James only, which is, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. And this idea of getting this right, of keeping God's name as holy and having honor about God's name, is a critical understanding of knowing what a relationship with God looks like. You see, God is interested in a relationship. And the reason why he's sharing this commandment with his people is because he's inviting them into a relationship. And just like every relationship, there are certain rules that come with it, right? If you're married, you know that there are rules that come with being married. Like, you can't date other people. That's just part of it. You can't do it. It's off limits. You also know there are some things that you can't talk about. You can't talk about your mother-in-law. Like, that's just kind of like off limits, right? You know, even when she comes for a week, you can't do it. You can't have conversations about some things that are from each other's past, or it's going to get really dicey. Why? Not because you don't want to go there out of fear. It's because you love them and you want to respect them and you care about the person that you're with. God's saying the same thing. He says, with my name, I want you to honor it. I want you to respect it. And I want you to take it seriously. Because the way that we treat God and the way we talk about him, the way we interact with him, reveals whether we believe he's there or not. You see, when you say God's name, you're getting his attention. My kids yell my name all the time. Dad, 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 like they're constantly throughout the house. Why? Because they want my attention. When you cry out to someone and say their name, you're getting their attention. When you say God's name, the God of the universe, who's aware of everything, pays you particular attention. So be careful what you're asking for. Now, God's name is not just simply just a generic name, God. You know, a lot of us, when we think about God, we think about G-O-D, God. But that's not his true name. He tells us his true name in Exodus 3, which we saw earlier last fall as we started our study in the book of Exodus. God called Moses to free the people from slavery in Egypt. And God meets Moses in the form of a burning bush and says, I want you to go free my people. So Moses asks the question, who's sending me? Look with me in Exodus 3, verse 13. It says, then Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God says, I want you to know who I am. And his name is tied into his essence, his identity. A lot of our names aren't really our identity. My name is Mike. That's not really my identity. It's just what they called me. But this name, God's name, is tied into who he is. I'm going to show you his name. And I do this with a lot of caution, because if we want to be people who really honor God's name, we just don't throw it out there everywhere. However, because you're God's people and he's revealed himself to you, I think it's worth knowing his true name. You should know your dad's name, right? Your Father in heaven. So this is what God's name looks like. This is what they call the tetragrammaton, which literally means 4 consonants, because Hebrew, when it's written, has no vowels. It's all consonants. And so there are 4 letters. This one, this one, this one, this one. This is Yod, He, Vav, He. And this word is tied with the being verb. In Hebrew, you read it from right to left, not left to right. This construction right here literally means is. God saying to people, I've always been, I will always be, And you can trust me because I'm never going to change. I'm the uncaused cause. I began everything, and nothing started me. That's who I am. And the reverence for God caused the Israelites to hold his name in such esteem that even when they were recording the Bible, because back in the day, I know when there was no printers at some point, there was no computers or any of that kind of stuff, they would actually copy the scriptures by hand. And scribes, when they would write passages like Exodus 3 and they'd come to God's divine name, they would take their pen, they would write it, and then they would snap that pen in half and discard it because it could never write another thing. Then they would go wash their hands, either in water or in sand if there was no water. Then they would pick up another pen and begin to write. Now, can you imagine writing certain passages where God's name is repeated over and over and over again? Like how tiring that would be, how time-consuming that would be. Why would you do that? The only reason why is because you care about God's name and his renown. That's what you're interested in. You have a high awe of who God is. And even when they would write this phrase, one of the only places in ancient Hebrew that you would find vowels is actually in this name, which are these vowel pointings. So these are inserted later, and they are the A, O, and I. A lot of times we've inserted these, so that's why people call this name Yahweh. But we're not 100% sure, because the ancient Hebrews would rarely say this. These vowel pointings are ultimately there to tell us to say a different word when we come to this word. They would say Adonai, which simply means the Lord. And they would not say it in their worship services. Why? Because they want to honor God's name. Now, many of us, we go, wow, that's a really big deal. Like, why don't we do that? Like, we like throw God's name in songs and we sing it. And like, are we being careful? I don't know if it's wrong to sing God's name in scripture, actually, or in a song, or say it aloud, but I do think we should be careful and really mean it. Because I think it's easy to break the third commandment, to misuse God's name. And I'm going to give you 3 applications on how we do that. And they're all going to hit home. They hit home in my life as we consider them. The first one is this. When we think about breaking God's commandment of honoring his name, not misusing it, a lot of times we think just like swearing. But it's more than that. The first one I want to present to you is simply this. The way we break this commandment is using God's name for profit. Using God's name for profit. See, in ancient Israel, often people would guarantee the things that they were selling by saying, in the name of God, this is okay. In the name of God, these goods and services are what they are said to be. It's kind of like an old school like Carfax for your car. Like this car's never had an accident, or an old school warranty on your stuff. We've all gotten that phone call, right? Where you get a phone call, you don't know the number, and like an idiot, you answer it. And they're like, hey, your warranty is expiring. You're like, I don't know if this is real, right? God's saying, you cannot use me to make money. Cannot use my name to back up things that I have not actually said are true. And y'all, if we want to really bring this into our modern age, I think it's important for us to understand that we can leverage God's name to make money in ways that God never intended. We can do that by staking our reputation to God's, knowing that we aren't really being honest in it. Both happens in the church and out. And God says, my reputation, my name is not something you're supposed to bring into the business of guaranteeing goods and services. Instead, you're supposed to use it to relate directly in relationship to me. The second way that we use God's name incorrectly is using God's name for swearing and cursing. This is the way most of us think about this commandment. You know, it's interesting. Many of us think, well, I don't really do that. Or if I do it every once in a while. I didn't mean to, but the Bible tells us that this is a serious offense. In fact, the passage, if you go back to Exodus 20, verse 7, can we throw that up there real quick? Exodus 20, verse 7. God says that he will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. that is scary because God doesn't tell you what he's going to do. It reminds me a little bit of what my mom would do when I really mess up. She'd say, wait till your dad gets home. You ever hear that? I was like anxious in those moments, like what's really going to happen? God here doesn't really say what he's going to do, but he does say, you should not break this commandment. Trust me. And here in our culture today, using God's name as a swear word or a curse word happens regularly. Maybe we don't say it, but we sure sit in rooms and go to workspaces where people use God's name incorrectly. We watch media and television and shows and internet feeds where people take Jesus' name in vain, God's name in vain. We did a little bit of a back study getting ready for this message. I asked some of my team to kind of just do an audit of how many times God's name is used in vain in movies that are currently in theaters. Just kind of a random data point, but what we found is that God's name is used in vain 157 times in theaters. That was alarming. A lot of us just got to skate right by it. But consider this. If God was hearing his name used as a curse word, how do you think he would feel? And is it fair that the one who gave his life for us, who died on a cross for us, the one who's the most kind, the most gracious, the most loving being that's ever existed, is now having his name subverted and being used as a curse? Doesn't that seem wrong? And so today, I just want to put before you that you should never use the name of Jesus as a slur or curse word. That's something that grieves God's heart. It wounds him. It's going against what he's declared about himself. And if you have, my invitation to you is to simply say, Jesus, would you forgive me of that? And even when you see it in media, there should be something within us that's appalled by it. It's taken aback by it. Saying this is not the way it should be. Which brings us to the third and probably most significant way that we misuse God's name, which is not living a life worthy of God's name. See, there's a way for us to take God's name in vain by the way we live our life. And you may be saying, what does that really mean? Well, in the beginning of Christianity was exploding everywhere. And in the beginning, we weren't called Christians. Do you know what our first name was as a movement? The word was, we were people of the way. Because Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So they're like, that sounds like a great name for us. But it wasn't sticky enough, apparently. And in Antioch, there was a group of people who were getting really frustrated with all these new believers, where people are giving their life to Jesus and falling in love with Jesus and saying, Jesus is enough. He's the Christ. He's the anointed one, the one that we've been waiting for. And so they came up with a nickname, hoping to shut them down. So they were coming up with this nickname. We're just going to own them with this nickname. The nickname is Christian. Because you guys are trying to be like little Christs. That's what the word Christian means. And guess what? All the people who heard that they're like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Being a little Christ, that sounds like what he wanted us to do. So they just said, we're just going to call ourselves that, and it backfired in their face. We've been called Christians ever since. But Christian, knowing that you are a follower of Jesus, what that means is that you're bearing his name in your identity. And when you don't live up to it, that's a dangerous place to be. You see, God wants you to live a life that's worthy of his name because you bear his name and you've been called to be people who love him and follow him. That's what God desires for you. But if we're not careful, we can be people who live lives that are cultural Christianity. And we've moved to a place where God becomes cultural and not captivating. Where we live good Christian lives, we eat Christian chicken, like we do all the Christian things. But we're not following God with our heart. He's no longer captivating to us. Just like the roller coaster story I told you, right? Where we had this moment like, this is ultimate. But when it gets really close to us, it can just become another thing. And the same thing is true for us in the South. In the South, man, we'll say we're Christians because we're not Muslim, or we're not Hindu, or we're not an atheist, but we're not captivated by Jesus. But my call to you is to listen to what Jesus said. If you have the copy of the scriptures, turn always in the New Testament. And in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, Jesus says something astonishing. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name?' And then I will denounce to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers.'" Jesus tells the story of what things are going to be like in the future, where people come to him and they will have done acts of power. They will have cast out demons. They will have healed people and prophesied in his name. And they said, "It was the name of the Lord that did this." And Jesus will tell them, "You are lawbreakers. You broke the third commandment because I never knew you." There are people who knew about Jesus, but used him. And Jesus says, the reason why you're not in is because you did not do the will of my Father. You knew all the right information, but you did not know God's will, and you did not seek his will, and you did not pursue his will. He's describing cultural Christians who are not captivated by God's will, because what God's will is he wants to glorify himself above every other name. That's what the New Testament tells us this whole thing is going towards. It's the fact that at some point, everybody will say, there's one name given among men by which you can be saved. It's Jesus alone. It's him, and we need to live our lives to glorify him. That's where God is headed. And so, I believe the third commandment calls us to be people who know our right standing with God. Because the fear with cultural Christianity is becoming casual with God, where he's become so close and we are so familiar that we lose our awe. That he's no longer someone that we're like, wow, he's amazing. See, God's telling us, I'm here, you're here. We're not peers. You're part of the family, but I'm God. And I think it's helpful for us to even look on this axis. I've been pondering, trying how to share this with you, but one of the things I realize is that for many of us, we struggle with the awe of God and the closeness of God. So some of us get awe for God. So we kind of think about God in this way. The more I learn about God, the more in awe I'm going to be of him. But we don't really get close. It's just head knowledge. A lot of us are like this in the South. We have a lot of awe for God, but we don't know him personally. But then there's others who are close. Like we just feel like Jesus is like so close to us. We feel close. We pray, but we don't have awe anymore. The right way of thinking about reverencing God's name is having both at the same time. So the more that we get close to God, we become more in awe of him. And the more we come in awe of God, the closer we get. They need to be both true at the same time, because he's the only one who can actually do that. He's the only one that can carry that weight. Every other single thing in humanity, whether it's the person you're marrying or the child that you raise or the person that you admire most, the more you get to know them and the closer you get to them, the more familiar they get, and your awe diminishes. But Jesus is the one who can carry the weight of that expectation. And so perhaps instead, as people, we should replace the phrasing of these words. Instead of saying, we live in a culture where God is cultural but not captivating, we should be people who say God is captivating, not cultural. And we're like, man, I'm captivated by God. I want his will more than anything else. My life verse last year was Isaiah 26:8, which says, "Yes, Lord, walking in the way of your truth, we wait for you. For your name and your renown are the desire of our heart." I love that verse. The verse says, yes. That's how it starts. Yes. Whatever the question is, God, my answer is yes. Yes, Lord. I want to do the will of the Father. That's what I want more than anything else. And I'm going to walk in the way of your truth. I'm going to walk in the way that you've revealed this relationship should look like. I'm going to keep the commandments. Why? Not because I have to, because I want to. Because I want to be close. I want to say yes. And then ultimately says, because your name and your renown are the desire of my heart. Where you simply say, what I want is I want God's name to be more famous than my name. I want God to be elevated. I want everyone to know that the name of God is the greatest gift, because God has invited himself into our story and revealed himself to us and come close, and our awe increases because of his closeness. So our time, 120 seconds, I want to point us to this. The statement I just shared with you out of Isaiah 26:8 is this: your name and renown is the desire of my heart. I hope you can say that. I believe if you say that phrase and you own it and it becomes your motto, your heart cry, your life will change. And so I want you to think about it. Whose name and renown are you pursuing? Is it yours? I'm telling you, that's not going to satisfy you. Is it the name of some other person or entity? Or is it the name of Jesus? You know, some of us, as we think about this, we may realize we've broken the commandment in all three ways. Maybe we've used God's name for profit. Maybe we've used his name lightly. Maybe we've not lived up to the name that he's called us by. And the beauty of the gospel is that Christ has come so that the punishment that God speaks to here, not let people go unpunished, will be reversed. And the only way it can be reversed is if somebody is punished instead of you, which is what Jesus did. At the cross, the punishment still fell, but it fell on Christ instead of you and me. And if we trust him, that is true, because all of us fall short here. If we're honest, we go, no, I want my name, my renown. I want people to know me. I want people to love me. I want people to tell me that I'm great. But there can only be one name that takes center billing in your life. So as I just take this moment to give you a time to reflect, just close your eyes, both feet on the floor. Consider this. Is the desire of your heart Jesus? If it's not, it can be. You can't run far enough away from him. You can't do something so bad he won't take you back. You can always come home. So if you need to do business with God, I just invite you to pray this prayer. Jesus, my answer is yes. I've messed up. I know that you've offered a way for me to escape the consequences of my sin. It's through Jesus. So I'm putting my confidence in that name. Before we close today, I want to take one more opportunity to ask you to give your heart to Jesus. You can do that right now, right where you are, by simply saying, Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I know I can't do this on my own, and I need you to take my place. I'm going to put my yes on the table, and I say to you, whatever you want me to do with my life, it's yours. And if you did that, God has done something new in your life. And He has given you a new name, a new identity, and a new future. You're now one of God's children. And I'm excited to see where God's going to lead you from here and in the future. We'd love to walk with you. One of the best ways you can do that is just simply to reach out to us by calling the number on the screen or sending us an email, and one of our team would love to help you take a next step and send you resources like our daily Bible guide that will help you grow in your faith. And now the very next step you need to take is to be a part of a local church. You can't do this thing on your own. So if you live near Spartanburg, this is your invitation to come be a part of what God is doing here at First Baptist. We would love for you to come home and be a part of our community. And if you're not close by, let us know, and our team will help you find a great church that you can attend in your community. God is using this ministry to bless people around the upstate and around the world as He transforms us into a people alight with Jesus.